Longtime listeners and members of the Illumination will know our next guest here, Sean Patrick Griffin, author of Gaming the Game, the definitive account of the Tim Donaghy scandal that rocked the NBA back in the 2000s. Also, professor of criminal justice over at the Citadel. And just, what is it, 3 times that you've been on this show, this program here? And
I think that's right, yeah.
Some of our best content here, and I think the stuff that people love to hear more about is the scandal that just doesn't seem to go away, is the Tim Donaghy scandal. And it's been about a month since the latest one happened. Amin's shaking his head. Like, does that feel long to you? Or
no,
like,
we play Tim Donaghy whack-a-mole around here. Every once in a while he pops his head up and he says some shit, and here we bring Sean out and he just grabs that mallet and nope, and knocks him back in his place.
Yeah. So Sean, we feel like it's long overdue because Tim Donaghy's been making the rounds over the last month or so since the news broke. So how was it for you to watch the news hit and then feel like, okay, when am I going to have to start getting out here and dispelling some of the stuff that's being spewed out there?
Well, first of all, for the informed people, I hope they realized that when they saw that press conference of the FBI director and everyone there, and then between the press conference statements and the indictments themselves, pay attention to how many times the words organized crime, mafia, La Cosa Nostra, and crime families were used, right? Numerous times collectively. Mm-hmm. Now go back to 2007 and do the same thing with the Tim Donaghy scandal. You won't see a single reference in a press conference, not in a press release, not in a court filing, nothing. And yet we're 14 years into this. Well, I mean, since Game of the Game came out, 16 since Donaghy's book came out, 17 since the scandal hit. And people have been hammering home, oh, the mob had something to do with Tim Donaghy and they made him do it. So anyway, watching the original press conference and reading the indictments, like I'm sure you guys have, was enlightening. And yeah, of course, predictably, people immediately turned to him to guide, ironically, of all people, to guide them through what to learn, what to look for, and how to contrast the current scandals to what he was involved with.
Yeah, we've done this show, a few episodes on Tim Donaghy and his claims and his falsehoods and all the things that he has said, whether it was the Untold Netflix documentary that came out a couple years ago, and going in deep on that, on his claims of certain refs having a bias against the Miami Heat and Pat Riley and all this stuff. And it turns out all of his claims in that story were the opposite, is that he was the one making the calls against
they were true.
Pat.
You know, they were true. There was a ref who was biased against Pat Riley in the Miami Heat. That ref's name was Tim Donaghy.
And so let's just like back up a bit. What is the Tim Donaghy scandal in a nutshell for people who has seen the names all over the news, and he's back on the air on multiple big time mainstream channels? What is the Tim Donaghy scandal in a nutshell, Sean? How do you explain it to people?
Sure. Well, Donaghy tells the FBI he begins betting at the end of the 2002-2003 season. He bets 2 or 3 games. Importantly, he's betting with a friend of his named Jack and Cannon, who's not a mobster. He's not a professional gambler. He's a golfing buddy who happens to be an insurance salesman. That's it. Well, you get to the start of the 03-04 season, which is the start of the scandal that we all talk about. And Donaghy then bets 30 to 40 games he officiates during that season and the next 3 seasons. And the key is Donaghy agreed. The FBI, for those people who don't know, had access to Donaghy, who cooperated, a professional gambler named Pete Ruggieri, who cooperated, other professional gamblers that have never been named publicly, but I know who they are. So when the FBI says in the written court documents and in their files that Donaghy bet on games he officiated, 30 to 40 of them in 03-04, 04-05, and 05-06, that's because they have this wealth of information. You then get to the 06-07 season. Season starts in October. They go through December 12th. On December 12th, well, let me back up. In the run-up to December 12th, Tim Donaghy throughout this entire time is only betting with Jack and Cannon, and he has no idea where Jack and Cannon is placing those bets. He just knows he's betting. Well, what the public didn't know until Gaming the Game was released in 2011 is that Jack Kincannon was placing his bets with professional gamblers. And when they saw that Jack Kincannon, who's a regular guy who loses just as much as the rest of us, was suddenly winning on particular NBA games. He would usually bet $2,000 on a game. They were losers like everyone else, but he would bet $5,000 on certain NBA games. And they realized, oh my goodness, these were games officiated by Tim Donaghy, and they knew that Kincannon and Donaghy were friends. So they made, they put two and two together and thought, oh my gosh, Donaghy's fixing games. And they immediately start copying those bets.
And what was his name? What name did they give him?
Tim Donaghy?
Yeah.
Elvis. He was the king for fixing games. Yeah. So anyway, so you get to December, and according to Tanya Martino, who is Tim Donaghy's best friend and one of the three co-conspirators in the 06-07 portion of this, he alleges that Jack Kincannon was not paying Tim Donaghy off on his winnings for reasons we don't need to get into here. Donaghy complains to Martino that he wants to find some other outlet. Martino says, well, my good friend who Jimmy Batista, as a pro gambler, I'll hook you two up. So on December 12th, they have that fateful meeting at the Philadelphia International Marriott. They cut a new deal where there are a few things important that happen at that meeting. First, Tim Donaghy is supposed to now give Batista the picks the day before games that Donaghy is officiating, because Batista is a professional gambler. He needs more time to manipulate worldwide betting markets to get the numbers he wants. And by the way, with regard to that, until that point in time, the pro gamblers were reliant on whenever Jack Kincannon just happened to place his bet. So it was a crapshoot as to how much they could move the lines to get the better numbers. And that's why when I got into the numbers on Twitter or X this week, when I was explaining how much money was bet, the betting in the first year was $20,000 to $30,000 a game, 03-04. Then it increased to $200,000 to $300,000 for the next two seasons. Well, by the time you get to 06-07 and Batista gets involved, he was betting $1 to $2 and sometimes more $1 million a game. Wow. And it was because he now had access to the picks well in advance, and he could manipulate the lines and get more money down around the world. So that's one of the key things that happens at that December 12th, 2006 meeting. And of course, the co-conspirators come up with this ridiculous scheme where they're going to talk in code on the phone as if anyone couldn't figure out the code if the FBI or anyone else was wiretapping. But anyway, so that's how it starts in December 12th, 06, and it continues until March 18, 2007, when Jimmy Batista goes into drug rehab. Now, importantly, I'm going to tell this story straight without focusing on what Donaghy says. We can do that afterward if you like. When Batista goes into drug rehab, the scandal simply continues with another professional gambler named Pete Ruggieri. Ruggieri gets a hold of the scheme as of March 18th, and according to everyone involved other than Donaghy, Martino, Ruggieri, and the other gamblers, they bet 3 to 5 more games. The scheme lasts into April, and then Ruggieri realizes betting lines are moving way too much around the world. People are in on the scam, and he's afraid of detection and any other number of things. They're also they're losing their edge. They can't control the market. And he shuts the scheme down in April. And as I've told your audience before, this is one of the many reasons I'm upset at the media, because you can look at the plea deals for everyone involved. Batista's is through March, Donaghy's, Ruggieri's, and everyone else who cut deals is through April. You can do this any number of ways. You don't need access to my files or to the gamblers or anything like that. Some of the public documents alone tell the story. And with regard to that December 12th, 2006 meeting, that's why I was so upset at the Untold program back in 2022 and with the Whistleblower podcast even before that. They all get into the whole mob made me do it conspiracy based on Donaghy's allegations, which are self-serving, of course. And he claims that in that meeting, 2 Gambino crime family members met with him and threatened his wife and family. And in one of the interviews, he famously says, I was shaking. Well, it was his best friend, Martino, and Martino's good buddy, Jimmy Batista. He knew these guys for years. And of course, that's why no one was ever charged with extortion. It's why the feds, unlike in the current case, never even mentioned organized crime. It was never treated as a racketeering case, all that sort of stuff. That's why for people still to not understand how basic in my view, the scandal was, unless you let Donaghy's nonsense dictate the narrative, which I get is, I guess, more sexy for other people. Me personally, I think an NBA referee fixing dozens of games in 4 straight NBA seasons with $82 million bet by the time you're done, that should be a story. And yet people aren't satisfied with that.
Sean, I'm curious, in the roughly 20 years since Donaghy, how have the tools of detection improved with regards to kind of gambling and the manipulation of gambling lines?
Well, there's a complicated answer to that. I mean, because one of the things I did not post about this, when I posted about how much money was bet in the current scandal, which is roughly 609,000 between all the people involved, all the scandal participants with Rozier, Porter, that crowd versus the 81 or 82 million with Donaghy, I was only focusing on the people actually involved in the scandal. I'm sure there are people copying the bets in the current scandal. Well, in the Donaghy scandal, I know for a fact at least 4 other professional gamblers were copying, and I believe 7 actually. One of whom is alleged to have made $200 million on the scandal. People had been copying these bets for years. It's just that no one knew. But getting back to your question, incidentally, I know the person who allegedly did that. It's a universe of 2 people, one of whom actually owned a sports book. And so he could actually control the lines. He could post lines without actually taking bets on them to influence other sports books. Anyway, my point is there were people involved in the offshore sportsbook industry who did detect it by the time you got to 06, 07, because the bets had gotten bigger. With regard to now, don't forget, and I know your audience probably knows this, the current allegations are not about outcomes, which is what the Donaghy scandal was, right? That was actually game fixing. This is harder to fix, prop bets. And so the detection systems, I think, are probably better with regard to outcomes, but with regard to prop bets, especially, you stop me if your audience knows this. Part of the challenge now is if you look at the prop bets, it's not only prop bets, it's unders, under rebounds, under assists, under points. Well, the idea that you're allowing that, not only allowing it, but allowing parlays on that where they're all trending in the same direction, you're begging for problems. And so some of the people I've spoken to said the offshore sports books wouldn't even take those. So because they know that there's no detection system that can exist to stop that.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why it's so fascinating to me, why they would place these bets at legalized sports books.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, listen, I think I always joke my white collar crime classes. I don't design it this way, but it's almost a how-to scam because this case is a great example. There are ways you could do this without being detected.
Yeah. What is the class you're teaching now?
Is really stupid.
And are you talking about this case right now?
Yeah.
In your class?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
What is the class you're teaching?
Well, I'm currently teaching policing. But of course, this is, cutting edge and it's my expertise and I'm all over the media. So, they want to talk about it. And I just do the basics, but I can promise you my white collar crime class in the spring, they'll have an entire week on this, on the current NBA scandal case, because what Amin's question is what I focus on. We want to know what systems are in place, either with regulations or laws to prevent and detect these things. And I'll disclose to your audience, I actually met with somebody from the NBA last year. They visited me in Charleston about how to detect what their systems could flag. And one of the things we focused on, ironically, was prop bets, because for the American audience that doesn't know, this has been a huge issue in Europe for years, where in their case, for instance, tennis, betting on tennis, you would think soccer is a big deal, and it is, but also betting on tennis is a big deal. Well, how can you monitor whether a tennis player has a foot fault or not? What if she has 3? If you can bet that, that's a problem. And nuances like that. Oh, and I want to say this to your audience. The argument for years, and you may remember this, Tom, and we probably did this in one of our interviews. I used to get a pushback when Game in the Game came out in 2011. I told people at the time, my worry at the time, because legalization hadn't happened yet, was fantasy sports. And that's another version of prop betting. And the argument was always, well, even if you were to do prop bets, the limits are so small, it won't matter. People who talk like that don't understand human behavior. Notice I didn't say criminal behavior. I said human behavior. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why you've all seen it with the headlines. Why would a multimillionaire do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Well, look, as you've already seen, one of the alleged people in the current scandal apparently had a big problem with debt, but it doesn't even require that. People like risks. People take chances. People like impressing girlfriends and friends and things like that. There are a million reasons this stuff happens, especially now that you can literally be in a locker room next to your buddy and say, watch this. And on your phone, you're just juicing them. You don't know. Because when I wrote Game in the Game, some of the some of the professional gamblers, I would sit down with them as they were manipulating betting lines around the world. And in case I didn't tell your audience this before, one of the funnier things I saw, they all monitor each other's lines. They don't monitor each other's accounts, but they know that a certain sports book at a certain time, if that line moves, it's my buddy so-and-so who's got the weight that would actually do that.
Oh my God.
Well, they would mess with each other while I'm sitting in the chair next to them saying, watch this. And they'd bet money on the wrong side of a line. They'd watch their friend chase it and bet it. And they text them, I gotcha. So they just lost money, but it was to prove a point and make some fun. My point is there are a million reasons people engage in this sort of behavior. So arguing that limits on prop bets would be a deterrent, that's just not reality. That's not how human behavior works.
Yeah, your big point here is well taken, that the size of the Donaghy scandal way bigger than what we're talking about as far as we know today. Right? That's one of the bigger points.
In the indictment, they've only alleged, I believe it's 5 games. At most 7, but I think they actually identify 5 in the indictment. Whereas with Donaghy, this isn't even alleged. The government and Donaghy agree that, and the only thing that's in disagreement, they agree that the number for Donaghy's games that Donaghy officiated that were bet, where it was between 108 and 139. Batista, Martino, and another pro gambler argue it's a little more than that. They say that it's 26 games larger than that. But even there, okay, fine. It's, whatever. It's 139
20 times,
or it's 165.
Yeah,
doesn't matter. It's not 6. It's not 5.
Right.
And the other thing too is, even if we discover other people in the current scandal were copying the bets and it's in the millions, I'm telling you, you're well over 100, perhaps 200 million when it comes to the Donaghy scandal that was being bet worldwide. That's why people, I understand, are very careful about saying Donaghy fixed games. But that's part of the challenge, I think. I think because you can't say, oh my gosh, it's so obvious, because either Donaghy didn't admit to fixing games, although he sort of did, and I'll get to that in a second, or if he wasn't on a wire bragging about quote unquote fixing games. I mean, short of that, people feel very hesitant to say games were fixed. Well, a couple of things about that. Again, pardon your audience if you heard versions of this. First, if you look at Donaghy's FBI file, they say that they learned he was in the business of fixing games. That's when they first get involved. And in the summary, after the cases are resolved in court, the FBI communicates one office to another. And in the synopsis, they describe Tim Donaghy as a professional NBA referee who was in the business of fixing professional basketball games.
Not providing inside information, which is what Donaghy is
right,
always said, that he just says, I know tendencies of these referees. I know the vendettas between the coaches and the players, and I'm betting on basically that information.
Right. So, and that's why, for your fans who don't know this, when Tim Donaghy was pleading guilty and trying to get a deal, the FBI refused to sign a deal unless he admitted that his on-court behavior was impacted by his bets. Because he kept telling them that nonsense. Oh, no, I had access to inside information. When all the gamblers who had cooperated with the FBI were telling him, no, the only reason we were betting millions of dollars on these games is because we knew they were being fixed. There's another component to that, by the way. For your fans who don't know, Tim Donaghy was only sentenced for the 06-07 portion of the scandal. Well, this is what he alleged. He alleged that although he only bet on games he officiated 30 to 40 times in 03, 04, 04, 05, and 05, 06. In 06, 07, right, where he's going to get sentenced for this now, he only bet on 16 of the games he officiated. And that's where all the professional gamblers and the co-conspirators say, no, 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 no. He bet well over 40 games that year. We were a part of it. And I, of course, had access to Batista's records, and access to Batista. And that's what happened. But that matters because his argument was, oh, no, insider information. So in 06-07, I bet 16 games I officiated and 14 I didn't. And my betting success was the same regardless. And of course, if inside information really was the reason, well, that would make sense. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The bets for 4 years were exclusively on games he officiated. And toward the very end, maybe March of of the 07 season, they bet a few games at Donaghy's direction, and they were all losers. And Batista and Martino stopped taking them.
Why did he do that?
What's that?
Why did he start betting or wanting to bet on games he wasn't officiating?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, of course, but there's a key thing that your audience needs to know. Tim Donaghy, until he hooked up with Batista, was betting just like you and me. He had to pay on losses. Well, Batista's deal, starting on December 12, 2006, was, I will pay you for every correct pick, and you don't have to pay for losses. So according to Donaghy, who claims he's a gambling addict, he bet less when he didn't have to pay for losses than when he did.
It doesn't stand to scrutiny. The logic does not compute.
I need to remind you, we are in 2025 having this ridiculous conversation, and people keep putting a microphone in front of this guy.
Well, let's do that. Let's put a microphone on this show. Let's bring up a clip here, Maze, from Patrick Bet David.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And I know you'd enjoy this one, Sean. Tim Donaghy joining a show that has 3 million subscribers to it and over 1 million views on this one particular episode. So let's let it roll, Maze.
Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, was on Pat McAfee. You think that was intentional?
Absolutely. I think he was trying to, get ahead of the fire a little bit and talk about that they need to get gambling under control. And I think that he's going to continue to try to figure out a way to, to put a lid on this. But it's going to be very difficult for him because I think this is widespread. I think it's going to be very damaging to the league. And, I just received a text message from one of the FBI agents that worked my case. And he basically said that they're not going to be able to cover this up like they cover up my case.
Listen, we could do hours on this, but Tom will know where I'm going with this. Donaghy says at the end of that clip that the NBA covered up his case. Now, what he's alleging, for those of you who don't follow the conspiracy theories, the conspiracy theory is that the story that ran in the New York Post, right? I forget the exact date. I want to say, it doesn't matter, but whatever. I want to say June or July.
Was that Murray Chase, the report from
Murray Weiss?
Murray Weiss, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the headline was NBA in a fix. Anyway, so the allegation is that the NBA leaked that story to the New York Post, hoping it would get exposed and hurt the NBA investigation. Well, I've written a lot about this, both on X and on my website. The investigation, first of all, it was a month between when the NBA was notified by the FBI and the story running. I want your audience to hear that again.
If you're David Stern and you catch wind of this and you want to bury this and cover it up, you immediately call up, according to this conspiracy theory, you don't sit on this for a month because if you're trying to blow up an investigation so it doesn't spread in the wiretap and where Donaghy's going to allegedly get a wire put on him and implicate other referees, you want to get that done as soon as possible. You're not sitting there for 4 weeks twiddling your thumbs.
Right. By the way, when I say it's a month, it's exactly a month. It's literally to the day a month. But beyond that, what the public needs to know is, by the time the FBI even notified the NBA, Donaghy had already cooperated. All the co-conspirators had already talked to the FBI. All the other government cooperators had already talked to the FBI. They already had all the phone records. My point is they knew the scandal. That's why they told the NBA that it was over. There was nothing noteworthy that was going to happen. So it just drives me crazy. So if you want to allege the NBA did it, I guess you can say anything, but that's not what happened.
He's a pathological liar, right? Here's
the thing.
Yeah.
I never called him a liar for the first 5 years, something like that, on purpose, because one of the feds I interviewed for Game in the Game said, look, I use the quote all the time. He's a fucking loose cannon. And what they meant by that was, and there's a line actually in his sentencing agreement where they say, just because Tim Donaghy believes it doesn't mean it happened, or something. I'm paraphrasing. And their argument is, look, who knows what he believes and who cares? It doesn't matter what his mind can conceive. It doesn't matter, for what's true to the record. So, but anyway, so I cut him a break early on, but then I have had so many engagements by degrees of separation with him where I know he knows he's lying that I said, okay, no, he's a pathological liar. Because he just does things that are just ridiculous all the time.
I mean, that's a great example of this isn't something that's a matter of opinion. We know by the order of events that is patently false, and the only way you can explain why he would say such a thing is because he's not telling the truth. Well, not because he didn't know, right?
Well, the problem is, and it might not be with your audience because your audience are diehards, but people love it.
Yeah.
The thing is, what he's saying, it's crazy and it's demonstrably false, but it's sexy.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about all the mob made me do it. I was shaking. He writes in his book, he was afraid he was going to wind up on a meat hook, like in Goodfellas. People eat this stuff up. I get it.
How has he not sold his life rights yet? Where's the Donaghy movie, the Donaghy miniseries? It seems like he would have sold that at the drop of a hat.
I think he tried.
Maze, I have a better one for you. I want all of your listeners to go search the internet and look for a single person in Tim Donaghy's life who said something like, I can't believe this happened to him. Of all the people, I'm surprised. Find that person.
Not Timmy.
Right? I mean, when this first broke, the local newspaper in his hometown, the Daily Times, interviewed high school players, teachers, everyone, neighbors. Then you had people in the Philadelphia Daily News did the same thing. And they all had some version of, people who know him think this is a cosmic karma. One person says, I couldn't find a single person to say something nice about him. The mayor in his town couldn't say, by the way, whose mayor actually knows the people? The mayor couldn't stand the guy. That's just Donaghy.
Voted most likely to be involved in a NBA gambling scandal in high school.
What do you mean by that? So what's the difference between this case and your case?
I think the David Stern was able to basically put a lid on it and paint me as one bad apple, the only guy involved, and nobody else did anything but me. And, we were going to move on from it. The FBI said that there was 6 or 7 other people that they wanted to indict, and this got shut down from the highest level.
I actually interviewed Phil Scala about that.
And who's Phil Scala?
Phil Scala. Phil Scala is a retired FBI supervisory special agent. This is really in the weeds. He was the supervisor of the unit which housed the investigation. Mm-hmm. There are 2 agents that nobody knows their name. Again, incidentally, for the people who are hearing my voice or seeing me and saying, my gosh, I didn't know that. That's incredibly important. And I hope you pause and go, gosh, how did I not know that? And what sources am I using that I don't know these basic facts? The guys who worked the case, the lead agent was Paul Harris and his colleague, Jerry Conrad. They're the ones who worked the case. Nobody knows their names because they were never parroted in the media, and Tim Donaghy never mentions them. Phil Scala, Donaghy loves mentioning all the time.
He wrote the foreword to his book, right?
Correct. And if you read the foreword to Donaghy's book, which, whatever, you do what you like if you want to buy the book. I'm one of the suckers who bought that thing when it came out, not realizing what he was doing at the time. Well, anyway, if you read he makes no comment about Tim Donaghy. He doesn't say anything about Tim Donaghy, the case, or certainly about Tim Donaghy's veracity. None of that. He writes about his history in the FBI and him going into private investigative work. So anyway, I interview Phil Scala of all people because that's the guy who Donaghy always puts out as the face. Oh no. And he said, and the quote was, if other people needed to be indicted, they would have been. That's a quote.
So that doesn't corroborate at all what he just said on this.
And by the way, what Donaghy was alleging by other referees, and I almost cursed, sorry. No people in the media, I know I cursed earlier, but I was quoting, it's okay. The people in the media don't say, well, they were going to indict them for what? Because if you listen to him, you think that they're talking about fixing NBA games. No, his allegation was that other referees were gambling at casinos and horse racing tracks, all in violation of their employment agreements.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no one ever says, well, for what? What were they doing? That's his answer.
Because if there was the implication that they were match fixing as well, then that goes back to, well, wait a second, then why was all of his picks losers that weren't the games that he worked on, right?
Wait, I have a better one. I mean, if the other people were fixing games, look, the pro gamblers are betting big money and they've got money to lose. They'd be betting those games too.
Yeah.
And
that's why all the bets were on Donaghy's games.
You looked up the betting. You actually talked to Jimmy Batista and wrote the book detailing his life. And again, Gaming the Game. If you want to understand this world of sports betting and NBA betting and the Tim Donaghy scandal, like, it's not just an NBA story. This is, and what I think your goal was in writing this story, it's a true crime story. This is like a white collar. How does millions and millions of dollars get bet and move through the system on NBA games? Well, you have to kind of learn the system of sports betting and talk to the animals, these huge big time bettors that are operating in different markets around the world that are moving money, millions of dollars on NBA games involving Tim Donaghy's the games that he was working. And so for people who don't realize, is like, yes, the investigation wasn't complete by the time that got leaked to the New York Post, right? What was the status of the federal investigation at that point? Was it done, or were they planning to put a wire on Tim?
It was pretty much done. That's what I'm saying. They already knew that there wasn't anything they were going to discover. The basics of the story are that whoever was going to cooperate had already cooperated. And Jimmy Batista was the lone person that they needed access to. And they already knew that he was not going to cooperate and they weren't going to have access to his betting records. So short of that, there was nothing left. And so that's when it wound up in the news. And shortly after that, this is really in the weeds. Batista, of course, never denied he was a professional gambler. He claimed it on his taxes.
Yeah.
So that wasn't the issue. And so once he was able to get a plea deal for illegal gambling, his whole thing was they wanted him to plead guilty like Martino and Donaghy had to wire fraud. And Batista's argument was, hey, I never told him to fix games. He was fixing games before I ever came along. So I'm not agreeing to that. And so that's actually what was going to go to trial against Batista. And then there's a great chapter in Gaming the Game where I walk you through how the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, they do what is called a character assessment. Because there were no wiretaps and they didn't have any of the actual text messages like we currently have in the scandal with Rozier and Jones and Porter and perhaps Billups, they didn't have any of that with the Donaghy scandal. So without that, they had to go on the words of their key witness, Tim Donaghy. So they do what is called a character assessment. Well, my gosh, if we're going to put this guy on the stand, what are the avenues of attack by a good defense counsel? And the character assessment of Donaghy was such a fiasco. They were thrilled to cut to a deal and not have to get to that point where they would actually put Donaghy on. Yeah.
So I think in the Shane Hennon stuff that has come out, he seems like a similar case of he's important to our entire, drawing up this scheme, but also he's drinking bottles of liquor on Instagram, which seems like a violation of his supervised release. And it's just like, how much can we really lean into this guy as a someone who's going to testify?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because, Tom, our first talk, however many years ago that was, you were fascinated by Batista and his lifestyle, driving in his beat-up minivan with 200,000 miles on it and showing up in court in gym shorts. He is the exact opposite of how Shane Hennon is described in documents and online, where he's a flamboyant guy. He wants all the attention or whatever. You'll remember Batista's argument, and same thing with his animal buddies. they didn't want anyone to know. And there's a great line in the book where they're at a Denny's in Las Vegas one time, and one of their friends visits them and says, these fat slobs sitting in a Denny's, people don't know you're running the books. They don't know you're running the worldwide market, because you would never know it. They just looked like four schlubs. And Batista was just a regular suburban dad. So that was the way they ran their thing. They were professional gamblers. They weren't hustlers. They were not about bling. And, they were certainly they had nothing to gain from people knowing who they were and what they were doing. By the way, having nothing to do with scandal, just in general.
The opposite, right?
Yeah.
The more that people know,
they were smart business people. Sure.
And then I find out, after I go to jail that, a guy by the name of Greg Andres, who was the head of the Eastern District of New York, took a job at a law firm and all of a sudden got all the outside legal counsel work for the NBA. So, it was a situation where David Stern really ran that whole investigation, and it got shut down by the, highest level people in regard to other people being involved.
Anything you want to add there?
Well, the obvious implication is that Stern had such influence that he was going to poach the guy afterward for doing him a solid and shutting the investigation down. They've made other allegations like that over the years. There was another one where the NBA had a television contract coming up, and they rushed it to get ahead of this news, which my argument has always been, even if that's true, that's not a scandal. That's business.
Right.
It's because, by the way, I forget who their partner was at the time. I don't know if it was TNT or TBS or ESPN, whoever it was. Look, they're allowed after the fact, if there's really something unsundry about that, to go to court. And that never happened.
That was in the Netflix documentary, I believe, was the theory that.
Well, I heard it first from Scala when I interviewed him in 2008.
What is most interesting about this current scandal to you, Sean? You've written books about white collar crime and this sort of fraud. What is the most interesting aspect of this current story as it unfolds?
Well, it's actually related to what Amin asked earlier. I don't think there's a solution to this. I don't know how you can, and if you're going to allow prop bets, I don't know how you're going to stop this, because it's just too easy. The thing is, one of the things that all of us who were involved in the legalization debate back before it became legal, 7 years ago now, we always debated how big is the market and how much would it impact day-to-day life. The argument was always, well, heck, gambling's theoretically been around forever. People who want to fix things, they were doing it already. Well, that's true, but a little misleading. It's a lot easier now. You could, if in order to do what I describe in Game in the Game, you needed to know people. You can't bet money offshore in the sums of $20, $30, $50, $100,000. You have to get that money back into the United States. That's what you were talking about earlier, Tom. Most people never took the time to go, yeah, what is that? Even if I somehow gain access to a website that allows me to bet, how do I get paid off? Years ago, they could credit your credit card. They banned that. Then you used to go to payment processing centers. They banned that. So now there's an entire universe of what are called agents. This is all illegal in the offshore. Yeah, it's easy to click on a mouse, but when you're talking about big money, which is what the current scandal is alleging, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're doing that offshore, that you're going to have to meet somebody in a certain location. At the time I wrote Game in the Game, there were 3 spots. One was Atlantic City for the Northeast. There was another one in Florida, and then there was Vegas, not just for Vegas, but for California. They just called it the desert. And you had to figure out a way to get you or somebody else to one of those locations to get that money. So in the current scandal, though, with people being able to bet legally so easily and get paid legally, we've increased the likelihood of these potential scandals. I've never taken a position publicly about legalization. I'm only saying you have to be intellectually honest. There's a reason you never saw this before, because either they didn't take the bets in the first place, or it was such a pain in the neck being able to orchestrate that it wasn't feasible. Now it's real easy, between manipulating it because of prop bets and getting paid out.
But isn't it also easier to track? And isn't that one of the reasons that, Jonte Porter specifically was caught so quickly is because of the legalization?
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up, Mace. But here's the thing. That's absolutely true. But the debate then becomes, as I said earlier, I'm not going to tell people how to do this, but a savvy person I knew the moment I read the indictment, I thought, oh my gosh, I know how you know how to beat it. There are ways to do this without getting caught. And, meaning, and that, like I say, when I met with the NBA, that was one of the things, which is, okay, well, you're always trying to figure out what could an algorithm possibly pick up? But here we're focusing on the bets. We're not don't forget that too. We're not focusing on the on-court activity.
Right. It's just the bets.
We're focusing on after the fact, after the activity has already happened. And we're hoping that, and again, if somebody like, whether it's Shane Hennon or whoever was actually being alleged in the indictment about the particular bets I'm talking about, had they not, because they were doing stupid stuff, creating a brand new account and then betting multiple times on a brand new account on a weird prop bet. It was just screaming for problems.
Right.
If they could have been disciplined. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say a measure of subtlety. If they had the subtlety of the animals, for example.
Yes. Well, because look, again, I don't want to give a how-to on your podcast, but
that's for your white collar crime class.
If you could literally, if you could accept a $500 or $1,000 wager here, there, it adds up. There's actually a line from Batista in the book about that. That he calls them nickels and dimes. He's not talking about nickels and dimes, but that's how you orchestrate your business. You just have to be savvy and patient.
Before we let you go, can you go run through how the home and away, the code worked? Because that's always my favorite detail in this story with Tim Donaghy and how they knew which side to bet.
Well, this matters. We're all laughing because, as we said earlier in the podcast, Donaghy alleged that he bet as often on games he didn't officiate as those he did. Well, as easily as he says that, he says, oh yeah, we had a code in the 06-07 portion where I would say one brother's name if I was betting on the home team and the other one of my other brothers' name, they're Tommy Martino's brothers, names if it was the away team. Well, your audience doesn't need game in the game. They don't need access to betting records. They go, wait a second. The only way the code works is if they know what game they're betting. And of course, they're games that are being officiated by Tim Donaghy.
That's my favorite part. It's my favorite part.
It's incredible because one would think, on the one hand, you say one would think someone who lies that often would be better at it. But then on the other hand, nobody calls him on it, and at least in the media. So he must think he's really successful.
Well, look, what has happened over time is at the very beginning of this, ESPN had him on. Do you guys know or remember Henry Abbott?
Yeah, that's our guy.
Right, the legend Henry Abbott, right? Yeah. Henry had him on, and he was well informed, like you guys are. And Tim Donaghy was having none of it. It was the first time someone had actually called him on his BS. And then he said, "Well, let's set up a lie detector." And so Donaghy originally agreed, but Donaghy wanted to write the questions. And so Donaghy wrote like 4 or 5 questions that had nothing to do with the scandal. He said, "I'll take these questions," and of course, it wound up never happening.
That's great. That's great. I'd like to be tested, but make sure I write the questions so I can provide the
questions
answers.
Are what's your name?
Yeah.
It's all the baseline questions.
It's Gaming the Game, the story behind the NBA betting scandal and the gambler who made it happen. Go pick up that book, order it now. And Sean, I know you're working on some other stuff here behind the scenes, but is there anything you'd like to plug and let our listeners know besides your book?
One thing, just please, you don't have to follow me, but check my X feed every once in a while because I'm not going to write a new book about all the new scandals and stuff, but I do follow it and I try and add some perspective, and it's SPG author on X.
I think you should follow it. That's my personal thought.
Well, yeah. I don't promote it because my kids say it's boring, but I know that it's just substance. It's just, it's just my work. I don't offer any hot takes.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to find good research and good, like, studying the facts and tracking all the dots. You're as far as we're concerned here on Basketball Illuminati, you are like the best dot connector we've had on this show. Like the research that you did to tell the story of how all this went down. And stick to the facts, which is so hard these days to find someone who just sticks to the facts. You're part of the Illumination for a reason. We appreciate you coming on and doing this because there's no one who knows more about this scandal than you, sir.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.